Welcome to Psychology to Live By. In this roundtable today, I'm joined by my very knowledgeable and insightful friends from Network Music. Terry McBride, Chairman and CEO, Colleen Novak, Artist Manager, Chris Norwood, Chief Strategy Officer, and Karen Mix, Director People and Operations. We will discuss the Music, Creativity and Mental Health podcast I recorded with Max Frost, who's a multi-instrumentalist, singer, songwriter, producer and social media phenomenon. He hails from Austin, Texas, and now lives in Nashville. Well, we had a wonderful conversation about music, mental health and creativity, and we touched on many topics, including the role of anxiety in the creative process, learning to drop expectations that this matters and learning not to care so much, technology and the evolution of art, especially the speed of music production, the myth of the tortured artist, not the tortoised artist, the relationship between great art and psychological pain and suffering, and the relationship between the imposter syndrome and career success. We then talked about being transported by music as a meditative-like experience and the unconscious, non-literal and poetic elements of creative production. And then we ended on the mystery of why and how music affects human beings so powerfully. So, all in all, it was a great conversation, and if you haven't seen it yet, I recommend it. But for now, the wonderful people from Network Music, I'll just bring them into view for me. As always, I've got to bring you on screen. As always, I'm always just so fascinated and interested in these are very interesting conversations, and what I love about these roundtables is it just brings up very different insights, and especially as we might contrast one artist to another with more or less the same topic areas. Anyway, so who would like to go first?
I can go first.
Fantastic. All right, Chris.
So many interesting topics in this conversation. You know, the one that I wanted to riff into was it kind of got into with Max the rat racy nature of the what have you done with for me lately kind of, of music, but I think it applies in a lot of places. But what has that guy done lately? Well, maybe he's got 8 Grammys, but he hasn't done anything recently, so he's old news, right? And you said something in there that just really struck a chord with me, which is loss of status can be more psychologically damaging than not getting the success or the status in the first place.
Yeah.
And that was just, it hit me like a baseball bat. And I think it's like so intuitive. I get like it makes so much sense. And I think the reason it struck me is because I think people actually recognize that and know that deep down, even if they couldn't put it so succinctly. So then if we tease that out, okay, I'm going to try not to get too far in the weeds here, but if we tease that out and we all know that that's true, it leads us to two outcomes, right? Like one is you accept it and you say, okay, I got to cling to that status that I've got with every ounce of my being. I want to spare myself that psychological damage by ensuring that I cling to my standing. It's the proverbial pulling up the ladder behind me, so that I can always stay on my pedestal. Or the opposite, which is accept it to be true, but instead of clinging to status, accept also that this is something that might be fleeting and instead focus on how you would move through that psychological damage if you lose that standing.
Yeah.
And so instead of denying the opportunities to others, which inherently puts you at risk, you're sort of trying to be generous with that status and accepting the friction and pain that loss would cause.
Yeah.
I see this everywhere in the world now. since this, since like literally everywhere in the world. And so I guess where I'm trying to bring myself back to earth, is this a dramatic over interpretation of that statement? Or is it as pervasive as it seems?
I don't think it's a dramatic overstatement. And I think it is as pervasive as it seems, right? So it's a view I have, and it's certainly shared by particularly social psychologists, that a lens you can take on human life is the pursuit of and the need for status, and so and for, and evolutionary psychologists agree, because the whole idea is that status is like modern day money,
Yeah.
right? And that if you don't have it, you don't survive. And and if you have a lot of money and then you lose it, that's devastating, and it's the same for status. But it is very pervasive. It's like one of the issues with people who've had say a good career in anything, and then they retire, and that can be psychologically devastating, because suddenly they're not getting reflections of their worth and their value,
Hmm.
right? But of course, this insinuates itself into every aspect of life. Whether it's relationship, whether it's one's looks, and so I'm interested. I was very interested in your two options. One was this clinging onto power or onto status, and keeping everyone else down. So a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
And I've got to admit, and I don't want to sidetrack this conversation, but I was thinking of a current president of the United States. In the losing of an election, can't accept the fact, and by all reports, it was very destabilizing for him, and so he had to reattain. So that's kind of a metaphor for all of us in all kinds of dimensions, for the difficulty of this. There is a third option, though, I think, Chris, and I think this has to do with a sort of what I see as a developmental task for all of us, which few of us attain, and that as we go through life, we progressively drop the ego.
Hmm.
So that's probably is a part of your part too, in the sense of your sharing, but also I think it's a deeper insight into the non-tangible, non really existent nature of the ego. That it's a useful artifice that outlives its usefulness. It helps us survive. It helps us compete. It helps us get by. But really, especially in modern life, I know there's lots of things wrong in the world, but basically it's pretty safe. And we're going to live our natural term, and there's not apex predators rolling around, so we don't really actually need the ego so much, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And in the conversation with Max, towards the end, we were just talking about some of the more, I guess, spiritual aspects of music, and there is this sense of dropping, not thinking about self, and dropping the ego, and that is health enhancing and experienced as it's more than pleasure; it's a kind of well-being. But it's I'm glad that rang a bell in you.
Really did.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. Who wants to follow this genius now? Not that we're talking about comparing status or
Well, I don't want to just pile on to what Chris already said, but it really, that's the same thing that really resonated with me in the conversation was the I found myself, I don't know, I hadn't thought about this before, but really developing like this empathetic state for artists being in that it's like a cycle of torture, right? With the like, I've got success, now I've got to beat that success, and like just how
Yeah.
that plays psychologically over and over again. But then how can building, I guess, getting to that point of building more of a humility to get to that point of egolessness, that it isn't as impactful, that cycle of torture. But yeah, totally just riffing on what Chris was already saying, but that's really what resonated with me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, and Max talked about this quite a lot in various ways, trying to, as he said, when he first wrote a song, he was just happy if his friends said, "Oh, you wrote that." And then you attain a certain level of success, and now if you fall short of that bar, you feel like that's a failure, right? And so, of course, so we habituate to a certain level of success or esteem or value, perceived value, and then if we drop a little bit below it, we start feeling like we're failing. So I mean, it's really interesting psychologically, isn't it? Because if you never had attained that success, then you could be quite happy, right? And you can see the way Max has been thinking this through over time. And, so I would suggest he's still got some way to go because, one of the things he said he struggles with is writing rooms because there are other people there and it triggers this social comparison thing. Whereas I think he used an interesting word, he recuses himself from, so that's fair enough. I mean, a lot of particularly creative artists, they just don't want the distraction of other people and this issue. But he definitely finds freedom in the creative process and not caring about whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. But actually, the other thing that was interesting, I think, in what he said was, he talked about the multiplication of music products out there through technology, etc., the availability and the ease of making. And so his conclusion was, well, I may as well make what I like. And I thought that was pretty wise. And it certainly fits with, as I said, the research on very creative people. They just end up producing what they like, essentially. It's driven by intrinsic motivation and some of it's good. I should say more accurately, some of it gets traction in the market. And you only need some of it to get traction in the market. But the issue that Chris and you are raising is how much traction in the market. If it's got less traction, and this has come up in discussions with all of the artists, and that is the metrics, having to track on social media, for example, Spotify, constantly being those up and down on the scale. It's like they can't escape this. So there has to be a kind of mental discipline to either not look too obsessively at that stuff, or when one looks at it, to be able to have a sense of self that stands independent of those numbers, right? The other thing, Karen, that struck me, and it struck me in all of these interviews with the musicians, that pretty much there's a little bit of age difference, but we've got people here they're not teenagers and they're not early 20s, more or less. I think that's right. But certainly someone like Max or someone like John Bryant, and so on, they're just a little bit older. And it's such a big ask for someone who's very young. This field is so challenging because they're still trying to develop a sense of self and a sense of their value and who they are, and be playing in this egoic space publicly that must be incredibly difficult, very destabilizing. Yeah. Now, we could talk about this particular thing for a long time. But yeah, loss of status is a really, really important thing. And this is why people, they often suicide over this, that if their business goes bung, or the love of their life leaves them for someone, younger and more attractive or whatever. It's obviously not an existential event in itself, but psychologically, it is like it is like a death, and people lose perspective because of the way it makes us feel. And I think you can link that all the way back to our Stone Age origins, that it would be like being rejected from the village, and therefore the apex predators will get you. So that's the wiring we have in us that gets reactivated. And that's why we have these, I would say, unrealistic and disproportionate responses. But it doesn't mean our system's not working as it's designed to. It actually means our system is working as it was designed to. Yeah. All right. So, Colleen and Terry, who's going to climb in? Okay. All right, Terry.
So a couple comments.
Yeah.
Everyone focuses today on social media. 20 years ago, that was radio. It was CD sales.
Yes, of
Came
course.
download. So that's always been there, and those egos have always chased that. And there's been many artists that I've had the fortune of working with would get to a very successful level, but couldn't sustain it. Definitely not in the perspective of those metrics of that day, which is not unlike the metrics of today. So that's just a comment. I'm not really looking for like anything else on that. The other thing about the not caring, I love the way that he framed it. There's 200,000 songs getting released to. Why in the hell should I care? It's no different. The sort of music business has always been metric driven. Your success is based on some level of, I don't know, sales or following or fan base or being able to sell concert tickets. And a lot of artists will have success, but they can't sustain it.
Mm.
And no matter what they do, they're never going to sustain it. There's a handful of artists that can sustain it.
Yeah.
So you're always going to be faced with that. The second part that Max talked about, which I really, really resonated with, was the fact that if there's 200,000 songs being released today, why should I care about my song? So I'm going to go back to writing lyrics that are abstract versus telling it the way it is, just telling the full story. Which leads me to the concept of the more abstract it is, it allows other people to attach their emotions to that emotion. When you tell the full story, unless you've lived that full story, you can't relate. So some of the most successful songs ever have been abstract enough that people attach their own emotions to it. And you could talk to a million different people who love that song. They have a million different reasons of why that means something to them.
Yeah.
And so getting back to abstract is actually a really good thing, because then you're being more universal.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I'll talk about is this whole thought about writing and how there's so many doors to get in that room, either through meditation or through writing in a group or writing solo. There's many different ways to get in that actually creative like space. And I'd never seen it framed that way. So now I will shut up.
Yeah. What was it? You said you've never seen a what?
I've never seen it described as doors to the same room.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was just a brilliant way of saying it. It's like getting in that creative space, that room. There's so many ways to come at it.
Yeah.
And some people only have one way.
That's right. I think that's absolutely right. And but that room, the room of creativity or the room of writing, the room, however one gets in there, it ends up with the same psychological result, and that is the person forgets themselves and is entirely present and absorbed in the work. So they're intrinsically absorbed, and that's where the good stuff happens. But I'm very interested in what you were saying there about the move to a more abstraction-based writing, and especially how that then creates a connection, a unique connection with each listener or each experiencer of the music, in that they then map their own experience onto it. And it's that mapping, I think, that's where the gold is, right? Right, because there is a sense then, it is interesting because you remember with Max, we had this conversation, we were talking a little bit about fame, and the uncomfortable part about fame is where fans think they know you. And he made the very, I think, insightful point. It's more that they resonate with the song or the piece of music, and they actually don't know you, and you are not that song or that piece of music.
Yeah, and I think his use of, Lennon and that,
Yeah,
and that Vietnam vet it's such a powerful part of that particular documentary,
yes,
right? In that he's like, no, it's like you have created this world with my songs that I'm just a normal guy.
yeah. I'm just a human, and
Yeah.
yeah. So that is
So
another.
hang
That's
around.
it's another interesting aspect of fame. Generally, it doesn't have to be the music industry, but this mapping onto people or onto the songs one's own meaning structures that may or may not have much relation to who you really are. So this idealization and glorification and so on, and of course we know that this makes people who are fairly famous uncomfortable publicly, because people just stroll up to them like they know them, and or just act weird around him. He mentioned his friends who are famous, and people all of a sudden start acting weird. So there's a lot there for creative artists to navigate. Yeah, and it's but again, I think you're right about the abstract piece. I think that it giving people room in a creative work to bring their own experience to it is super important. And I've noticed too, I don't know whether it's true for you guys, sometimes it's hard to know why you really like a song or why you like a piece of music. It's hard to, but there's something there that speaks to you at a non-particularly conscious level. Yeah, I spoke to him a bit about the looser modes of consciousness. They're much more complex. They're more evocative. They're more poetic. They're more emotionally resonant, and therefore they can't be contained or held in consciousness. They're too complex. So that dropping into the abstractions place, it opens up that level of resonance, which is very hard to explain. It's like looking at a great work of art and people say, why do you think it's great? It's like, you know, nice colours. Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, Terry. And Colleen.
There were a lot of things that really stood out, but I think when you were talking about being social, that we're social mammals, we're social beings,
Yeah.
and how creating, there was a conversation about technology and creating art, and a long time ago, without technology, maybe less art was produced, which I think is an interesting topic, just because I think in some ways with technology, there's just too much being produced and too much noise and too much of everything, that
Yeah.
there may be a lot more produced, but maybe it's I wouldn't say it's not the right quality, but it's different. I think that people before had a lot more time and there was a lot more thought, and maybe it was a little bit more, their lives were more at risk, and it was their whole being. It was everything.
Yeah, when Max was talking about this, I think he said a couple of times that he's still trying to figure it out. Like it's an open question, and I would agree with that. I mean, there is a sense in which we are overwhelmed with all kinds of content. That the internet was going to be such a wonderful thing, and in many ways it is, of course. Liberating access to knowledge, etc., etc. But as we know, it hasn't panned out exactly that way. It's been a source of misinformation as well, and
Chaos.
confusion, and what, and chaos.
And chaos, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it messes with your creative abilities because you can't focus the same way, and you can't just
Yeah.
do what you do.
And well, exactly. And but I must admit, when Max was talking about that, I was really thinking, now, what is the difference between creating now and creating prior to these mass scale technologies? And his view was, and I don't know the answer to this, but his view was there would have been less creative output. But I was kind of thinking, I don't know. They weren't as busy in a way. Like, yes, there was survival, but if you'd had the meal for the day, music seems to have been a universal thing. There would have been a daily thing. It would have been more a communal practice.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. You wouldn't have had. It might not have been as specialised a craft in the sense of there was one musician in the village. It would have been that everyone sang and everyone clapped and probably played. No doubt there was a range in people's expertise and interest, just like today. But I think one of the differences that the technology has made is this commoditization of it, and this, I'm imagining songs would have been shared and repeated many times, and that was a part of the continuity of a culture. You sing, whereas now it's like this endless smorgasbord, and the menu just keeps changing, and you never get to eat every item on the smorgasbord before it's changed yet again, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And so, but I think we're all struggling to understand this. There's obviously wonderful things because you can then create a village out of this gigantic funnel called, say, Spotify, and the algorithm hopefully assists you in creating something that resonates with you, and you can curate it. So I don't know. I mean, there's pluses and minuses in everything, isn't there? I mean,
yeah, I agree. And I felt at the end of it, I felt like this would be really helpful, this interview conversation, to share with other artists. And I think the mention of, A&R reps and, there's a whole range of people who are impacted by that, and the insecurities of making the wrong decision and signing the wrong artist, and not producing enough. And so I think that you just have to get past that insecurity and just try to block out the noise.
I think so. And I mean obviously this is a huge topic that extends well beyond the music industry, but this is sort of in social media, the number of likes you have, or the number of followers, and that people start to be captured. If they're not careful, the people become captured by their audience. And there's plenty of documented cases of people going kind of mad, or just becoming unrecognizable as they keep what's the word I'm looking for? They change themselves to fit the audience, and then they become unrecognisable. Their beliefs change, their values change, and this speaks to the power of status. You know, we were talking before about loss of status, but status can really pervert because it's so seductive, right? So, you know, it's a very, we live in, well, as you know, it's apparently not a Chinese proverb, but the alleged Chinese proverb is that the Chinese curse is, may you live in interesting times. You've heard that one? Apparently it's not Chinese, but we do live in interesting times. And it's puzzling, and it's at times confusing, and in many ways this discussion with Max, I think you're right, it would be helpful for people because you can kind of see the way he's thinking his way through it. But he's a very thoughtful man. You know, he really thinks deeply and carefully, analytically, and I mean that as a compliment. And he's wrestling with these issues. Just as this august group here and I have been wrestling with, you know, some very important things in life, things that we grapple with that are very real. All right, my friends, well, I think we'll call that a wrap. And as always, you know, it's a great pleasure to see your lovely faces, but more importantly, to struggle to answer your insightful and deep questions. And we will reconvene soon, I hope, and we'll have another discussion. So take care. And in this roundtable discussion, you've been listening to the hauntingly lyrical song by Max Frost called The Ghost.